The Rivals Undoing. My team was once again victorious. In a tough final against the esteemed River Valley High, my school volleyball team, Woodlands High, won. I gleamed proudly, the embodiment of a proud captain and most valuable player of the school league for 2 years straight. Setting a good example, I led my team to start shaking hands with the fallen players of River Valley. Plenty of them were familiar faces, seeing as we were all experienced and seasoned players who have gone through elementary and high school battling it out in the court. 11 hands I shook and congratulated for their valiant efforts. All but one remain, and that was the opposing team's captain, Dalton Jonas. Cautiously, I approached him and was about to extend my hand out when he strutted past me and disregarded my existence. Unbelievable. So much for sportsmanship. We had been on rival teams since we were young, and I must say, this was the first time I had ever had this close of an interaction with him, and he surely lived up to his pompous reputation. I rolled my eyes and brushed it off, however. I wouldn't let a man, much less a rival, ruin a magical and special night for me and my team. "Congratulations, Jake," shouted my best friend and co-captain Khalid. "Congratulations, Cal," I said right back as I went in for a hug. A voice interrupted our moment. "Mind if I join?" bantered a familiar coach, Sir Arnold Catrice. He was the coach of the regional youth team in our area. He oversaw the volleyball games between neighboring schools and was always around to scout some new players that he could recruit on a regional or perhaps even national level. "Well done, both of you. I'm getting straight to the point. I'm inviting you two to join our summer boot camp. See how you fare during the regional summer league while playing with other teams around your age," Sir Arnold offered. My mouth was ajar and patted Khalid excitedly. This was the icing atop a very sweet cake indeed. How could this night get any better? We are beyond honored, and I personally accept that in a heartbeat. How could I not? "You deserve every bit of it, child," he replied. "Here's the catch. I want you to work with someone difficult. Someone like Dalton Jonas." You'd think after yet another loss in the inter-school championship, he'd humble himself down a little, huh? "Looks like he isn't capable of doing that at all," ranted Khalid as we stormed the gym on our first day of summer camp with volleyball players from neighboring schools. Together with other excellent players, most of them the star of their team, we made up a 12-man roster for Region A. We were in a secluded camp that gave very Camp Rock vibes with its cabins, greeneries, and water bodies, except that it had a lot more sporting facilities. Wilson's Sporting Camp, they called it. While Khalid and I were elated to see some familiar faces that we had faced off in court plenty of times, we couldn't say the same for Dalton Jonas. It seemed that even the bliss of the summer waters and the freedom from academic and varsity stress were insufficient to get him to loosen down. The moment he stepped into the gym, he looked straight up deadly, as if getting ready for another final. But even as he looked ever so menacing, I tried to keep an open mind. After all, Sir Arnold did think I was capable of working with even my worst rival. He must have seen something in me, so give him the benefit of the doubt I did. "Hey, cut him some slack. He did just lose the inter-school title, didn't he?" I told Khalid gently. He looked aghast. "You're defending Jonas?" I rolled my eyes and hit his arm playfully. "Never," I replied. "It's just that we'll be stuck here for another month or so. So, what do prejudices really do besides aggravate existing dislike? It's not dislike, you know that. Obviously, when we talk shit of this man, we have basis. You'll still be a team, right? So we should at least try to act civil with him?" Khalid shook his head at me, as if disbelieving that these notions were coming from me. He was smiling though, as though beaming with pride at my so-called maturity. "You really are our school captain for a reason. I never could have said anything with such sensibility and consideration. That's because you let the hate get the better of you before you even know him. The Lord must have heard me preaching about setting aside our differences for the sake of the regional team, because at that moment, Sir Arnold partnered me up with Dalton Jonas. Although Sir Arnold had hinted at this when he was recruiting us, the magnitude of it truly hit me then and there. Captains of two rival schools coming together and partnering up to make a regional youth team work? It wasn't unheard of, as many star players and captains come together in regional and national groups such as this. They only took in the best of the best for these large-scale teams, you see. But my history with Dalton Jonas was not identical. We had been playing in rival school teams since we were in elementary. Our feud felt personal, but still, I swallowed the lump in my throat and approached him cautiously. I stood beside him, as did the other members of the team, who were getting paired up as well. The silence that ensued was one that I had already expected, so I simply observed my surroundings, mustering the courage to kickstart a conversation with this man that I barely knew, besides his moves on the court, and yet I seemed to have developed a test for, and vice versa. He was much taller than me, with his disheveled hair that I was certain all the girls in his school dreamed of running their hands through. Just like me, he was rather thin, but he had just the right amount of muscle. His eyes, though, remained his most attention-grabbing features. They were a light shade of blue, cold, and seemingly unfeeling. As we did our warm-up drills, I finally uttered the first word between the two of us that day. "How's your team holding up? You guys did incredible, and I'm looking forward to seeing you again next inter-school season." Dalton Jones snickered. "We don't need your pity." I wasn't extending my pity. I was merely starting a "Save it," he said as he held a single hand up. "I'm not interested in making small talk with anyone here, much less someone from a rival school." I rolled my eyes dramatically and carried on with the drill, powered by my newfound annoyance for my partner. How very mature from the captain of River Valley. He simply carried on with the drills, unbothered by my comment, and seemingly unfazed by everyone else around us too. While I conversed amiably with the rest of the players in between drills and during breaks, Dalton Jonas kept to himself and spoke to no one but Sir Arnold. He kept his distance, frequently sulking, and annoyance etched on his face. And so we went on the rest of the day like that, tossing the ball back and forth and reacquainting ourselves with the game. Although completely silent and not communicating even once, Jonas and I did our drills almost perfectly, save a mishap or two. Undoubtedly, we were both talented players who simply hated each other. Later that day, once practice had concluded and we were free to do as we pleased for the rest of the day, I was packing my gear when Jonas approached me. "Look, Jake Harris, I have no clue how you run shit in your school, and quite frankly, I don't care. I'm aware you're some big shot there. Whatever the reason is, I may never know. But one thing's for sure. While I'm here in this regional team, you don't get to boss me around." Dalton Jonas tripped and sprained his ankle. I felt like I should be rejoicing, because I'd never seen this man be this vulnerable and hurt. Alas, I didn't feel an ounce of satisfaction at the sight of him being hurt. Pompous as he may be, I couldn't imagine being that cruel and wishing harm upon someone, and so I came to the rescue. A few players had already seen him down, but carried on with their life thinking that he could manage it. Surely he could, but what was there to lose if you helped someone, right? Even if you and that person may not be in the most cordial situations. After all, we were regional teammates. "I'm not here to boss you around," I clarified, before he could even mutter a single word. "Are you okay?" He stared at me dead in the eyes, the intensity of those blue orbs piercing on my skin. "Does it look okay? It's swollen to the size of a tennis ball. You think it's okay?" I didn't let his usual snarl deter me from helping him. Instead, I reached out for his injured foot carefully and elevated it, which made him wince, but he knew better than to complain. As I examined his foot and performed basic first aid on it, I could feel his gaze on my face. He was likely astonished that I was still extending my help towards him, despite his insolence. "I don't need your help," he said rather softly. It lacked his usual sassy tone, and seemed as though he only said it for the sake of living up to his impertinent reputation. "Clearly you do," I replied, unfazed. I stood up and used all my might to lift him up. He was able to do so with much assistance and a lot of limping. "Lean on me," I said. "For what?" "For support, duh. Right." Together, with my arms wrapped around him tightly, and him leaning towards me for support, we headed towards the sports clinic, where he could seek professional help. Once we got there safely, I settled him on a chair and was about to head out without another word. "Thank you," Dalton Jonas whispered to my utmost shock. "I don't know you shit though." Rolling my eyes, I headed out without replying. It was always give and take for him. He showed one sign of goodness, and he just had to take it back, almost instantaneously. I would take what I could get though. Deep down, I still believed there was good hiding somewhere inside it. Whether I should be able to find it is still highly improbable. But this was a start. Rest days at Wilson's were always exhilarating. We got the day off to ourselves, devoid of any practice or training, unless we decided to do conditioning on our own. The ladies' volleyball team also had their rest day today, so as we gathered in the cafeteria for lunch, everyone was in high spirits, chatting excitedly and sharing tales of their short-lived summer before coming to camp. Everyone except Dalton Jonas, of course. He was sitting at a far corner, picking on his salad and being the embodiment of a Grinch. No one really dared to speak with him, lest they be shot down instantly with his sarcasm and downright coldness. I suppose to this date, I was still the sole person in the regional team who had bothered to converse with him outside of plays. Woodlands High truly is a delight to watch, Jake, complimented Nicole, a player from the women's regional volleyball team. I'd love to come and train with you sometime. Sure, we'd be delighted to have you and your team. She beamed excitedly at the prospect of training with us, and possibly scrimmaging, but the elation etched on her face was wiped off at once when she met Dalton Jonas's eyes. He was downright glaring at her. Or me. I didn't know, as Nicole and I were sitting side by side, and talking animatedly before he entered the fun. Do you happen to know why Dalton Jonas is glaring at me? Did I do anything wrong? Nicole asked innocently. I let out a small laugh and shook my head vigorously. Excuse him, that's his normal countenance. Later on that night, as the boys' team gathered in our common room, I made an unthinkable move. While the rest of the team were relishing their free time, engaging in some board games, and marathoning some Marvel movies on the large screen, Dalton Jonas was, of course, solitude at a far corner of the room. In his hands, he held a book, and how peaceful he looked. Given his intimidating exterior and robust build, who could have thought that this man enjoyed winding down with a book? I don't know where I mustered the courage, or why I even thought that this would be a sensible act, but I approached him. May I asked politely, gesturing towards the empty chair next to him. He simply stared at me, as though waiting for me to cut to the chase and tell him what I wanted. I didn't wait for a reply, and just met his gaze and sat. What do you want? He asked brashly. Let's quit this hostility. I want a truce. You have no right to demand anything from me. I'm merely asking. You said want. If you meant to ask, you would have questioned me right back on what I wanted. Must you retort everything I say? Oh, absolutely, he said pompously. I fought the urge to seethe then and there. I approached for one purpose, and one purpose alone. To be cordial with him, so it wouldn't affect our performance as a team. I wanted to, once and for all, set aside our differences, and play as one team. I wanted to connect with him somewhat. This whole thing, I gestured towards the both of us, is tiring. He raised an eyebrow. That's your opinion. This works perfectly fine for me. I huffed, what works perfectly fine for you, huh? Being in your own little world because you're too good for everyone? Being hostile for no apparent reason because you think that makes you reputable? I'm already reputable. My personality is simply a bonus. What personality? He glared at me. I sighed and closed my eyes momentarily. This was proving a lot more difficult than I had initially anticipated, but I must persevere. After all, if I had approached Dalton Jonas and nothing good came out of it, I would essentially lose face. Look, you're an excellent player. Tell me something I don't know. I resisted the urge to roll my eyes at his arrogance and carried on with the speech that I had been planning in my head for days. I want us to work together. I want us to make this summer a success and put behind our differences. See, that's the difference between you and me. You see rainbows and butterflies. I see the plain, ugly truth and I deal with it. No sugarcoating needed. Just go with the flow. Let me tell you, it's clearly not working. We've been here for over a month and rats have a stronger chemistry than us. I just want us to have a truce and to be civil with one another for the sake of this summer endeavor. We're both goal-oriented and driven, and I know that in this room, you're probably the only person who wants this national championship just as much as I do. He stared right at me, and I wasn't gonna lie, it made me a tad bit uncomfortable being under his scrutiny like that. Not to mention that we were surrounded by our teammates who would be surprised that we were able to talk so secluded like that without stabbing each other. You frustrate me immensely, Dalton Jonas commented, as do you. He continued staring at me and I hated myself for averting my gaze, because when his intense eyes were on you, they surely made you uncomfortable, or at least they made me uncomfortable. And that was purely because they were so beautiful. I knew that if I as much gazed back at him, I wouldn't be able to contain myself and would just revel in their beauty. And I just couldn't afford that. I didn't need to inflate his already massive ego. I despise you, he spat out. I simply laughed it off, already predicting a line like this when I practiced the speech in my head before I approached him. No, you don't. If you truly did, you wouldn't even bother talking to me. Insufferable. Twat. I spat back. So what do you say? I bravely looked into his eyes this time around, and I didn't know when the shift happened, but for some reason, his blue orbs looked much softer this time around. Gone was the typical hard countenance that he put up, and he almost looked normal. Fine, but we're still not friends. I gave him a victorious smile. Would never dream of it. "Do you ever stop talking?" asked Dalton, annoyed. I gave him a deathly glare, and he remained unbothered. It annoyed me that I seemed to give off zero intimidating vibes towards him. He did quite the opposite to me, although he had warmed up since our talk of a truce weeks ago. "You like when I talk," I retorted. He snickered, continuing our jog. In our pairs, Sir Arnold assigned us various workouts for the day, and Dalton and I started with the jog around camp. It was breathtaking, seeing all the views that Wilson's had to offer. I was at peace. I never even knew this was possible, given that I was paired with my greatest nemesis. "You flatter yourself too much, Harris." "Hey, I'm the only one who puts up with your hostile ass in this camp," I defended. He raised an eyebrow, speeding up on our last lap before we reached the end of our jog. "And whose fault is that? Did I ask you to annoy me or beg you for a truce?" "Unappreciative bastard," I said. "Talkative twat." "Well, this talkative twat sure is looking out for you, is he not?" And he didn't reply after that. We arrived at our destination, the waterfall at the seam of the camp. "It's beautiful," I commented before settling down on one of the large rocks and sipping on my water bottle. "It is," said Dalton. I could feel his gaze as he settled next to me. "Don't you ever get tired of being misunderstood?" I asked boldly. In the past weeks that we had gotten to know each other, I found out that Dalton Jonas was a multifaceted individual beneath his cold exterior. Just like me, he adored dogs and had a corgi named Abel at home. He was a big family man, although it wasn't evident. He had 5 sisters, and he was the eldest of the 6 siblings. He loved to read. Who could have known such an unmoving and emotionless man was actually capable of having such a personality? Why would I be? My family knows who I am, and they love me for it. "I don't need anyone else's approval," he replied. I nodded solemnly, although I still didn't get why he had his guard so high. "Doesn't it get lonely? The fact that I'm out here, dealing with your existence, must mean I'm getting rather lonely, right?" he joked. I glared at him. "I'm just kidding, Harris," he bantered. "You're not too bad yourself, if I'm being honest. Don't let anyone else hear that, though. They might think we're friends. Gross." I laughed. "You pretend to be this tough, emotionless man. But I see you, Dalton. If they looked deep enough, they'd see you're a good man." He simply stared at me, and there went those blue eyes again. This time, they were devoid of the usual coldness, and in its place was softness, and almost pleading-like. "You're the only one who ever dared say that," he commented after some time, staring at the waterfalls in front of us. "I suppose that makes me special, does it not?" For the first time since he entered this camp, he actually smiled. It was endearing, and he looked much more handsome like that, happy and carefree, as opposed to his usual sulking and frown. "Whatever helps you sleep at night, Harris." We were national champions. Weeks of training for the inter-region competitions led to this moment, and I couldn't be happier. We defeated Region B in a tight game, and I was over the moon. Finally, I could go back to my family and relish the remainder of my summer. It had been a fulfilling time, learning from my fellow student athletes and getting trained by Sir Arnold himself. But alas, I was happiest when I was at home, and I couldn't wait to get back to my team and tell them all about my summer escapades. "Congratulations, Jake," screeched my friend from the women's team, Nicole. I gave her a bear hug, and at the corner of my eye, I could see Dalton retreating towards the locker room amidst the celebration. This Grinch couldn't even celebrate our victory, and mind you, he was the most valuable player of the inter-region games. How could he not be elated right now? "Excuse me," I told Nicole as I followed Dalton in a jiffy. "Hey," I called out just before he entered the locker room. He looked back at me, standing in the corridor, but didn't utter a word. I followed him into the empty locker room and stood in front of him as he took off his gear. "Congrats, Mr. MVP, well deserved," I started. "Thanks," he muttered weakly. I was perplexed. Is something wrong? "Hey, you're MVP, and we won! How can you not be happy right now?" He threw his knee pads on the ground dramatically and stood up to meet me eye to eye. "Look, our goal here is done. We can go back to our separate lives now. You can go back to that blonde girl who won't stop pestering you." "What? You like her, don't you, Nicole? And she likes you right back, of course." "What the hell are you talking about?" I asked. "Oh my god. You're jealous. You're kidding, right?" He simply stared at me, and my suspicions were confirmed. "You like Nicole?" I asked. Was that why he was glaring at us when we spoke during lunchtime? Was that why he was particularly hostile towards me? He thought I was stealing the girl he liked? "Are you joking?" he asked roughly. "No, I'm perfectly serious," I affirmed. "How can such a smart person like yourself say such stupidity?" he exclaimed. clearly frustrated. Whoa there, that's a bit out of line. I was just saying, you don't need to spit insults towards me as if we hadn't been friends the past few weeks, and as if we're back to square one. It's you I like, Jake Harris. Look, I like being around you. I like how you have the guts to approach me when everyone avoids me like the plague. I like how persistent you are, despite my hostility, because I just can't express myself the way I want to. I like seeing you happy. I like you. I was at a loss for words. All this time, I'd been questioning these budding feelings in me, pondering whether it was obvious that I had feelings for him too. So I didn't say them out loud, but instead showed them. I approached him even when he was anything but welcoming. I spoke to him even at times that his replies were merely grunts and hums of approval. And I like you. I like how passionate you are. I like how you're no nonsense and don't deal with anyone's shit. I like how deeply you care about your family, and your sport, and your team. This isn't easy for me. I don't even know if I had felt anything prior to meeting you. I didn't even know I had a heart before it beat for you for the very first time, he expressed, taking my hand and putting it over his chest. This is for you now. I leaned in carefully, breathing in his scent and my heart thumping so violently against my chest. He was so close, so I closed the gap between us and kissed him. Dalton's lips were like a cloud, soft and perfectly fitting mine. The kiss was sweet, but full of passion, ignited by fire and desire. We won in more ways than one today. The end. Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing to become a part of our Rainbow Force, and stay wholesome.